and also present a significant opportunity to utilities and energy efficiency program administrators that are striving to meet their energy efficiency goals. Next slide. So today you will hear from ACEEE, Todd Nedwick from the National Housing Trust, and McKibbin from CNT Energy. We will each present briefly, and then there will be time at the end of the presentation for questions. So again, you can submit your questions at any time using the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. Next slide. So I will start by sharing brief highlights from ACEEE's recent report, Scaling Up Multifamily Energy Efficiency Programs, a Metropolitan Area Assessment. And first, for those that are not familiar with ACEEE, we are a nonprofit research organization working to advance energy efficiency policies, programs, technologies, investments, and behaviors. And this report is part of our Multifamily Energy Savings Project, which is a multi-year effort to expand and improve utility energy efficiency programs for multifamily housing, which is supported by the MacArthur Foundation. Next slide. So first, it's important to answer the question, why are we focused on utility energy efficiency programs? And the answer, as you can see in this chart, is that to a large extent is where the money is. So energy efficiency programs funded by utility customers exist in nearly every state, and they're one of the most significant sources of investment in energy efficiency. And this chart shows the growth in spending on customer-funded programs over the last decade. You can see in 2011, spending reached $7 billion, which is according to our most recent state energy efficiency scorecard. The important question is how much of this spending is going towards multifamily buildings. Next slide. So in our recent report, we sought to map out the current landscape of multifamily energy efficiency programs focused on the 50 metropolitan areas with the largest multifamily housing markets. So you can see here shaded in green or gray. And we looked at in-depth Public Utility Commission filings for the primary electric and gas utilities serving each metro area for the year 2011. In 30 of the 50 areas we analyzed, those shown here in green, were served by one or more utilities that offered an energy efficiency program targeted multifamily buildings. But you can see that many large metropolitan areas, including places like Dallas, Miami, and Las Vegas, were not served by a multifamily program. And to clarify, the programs shown here are those specifically designed to target multifamily buildings. So these are not broader residential or commercial programs for which multifamily buildings may be eligible. And Ann and Todd will both touch on why there is a need for programs that are designed specifically for multifamily buildings and their owners. Next slide. So we also looked at spending by program for each of the primary utilities to get a sense of how spending on multifamily programs compared to other sectors. And this chart shows the spending on multifamily programs in each metropolitan area, that's the blue bars. And you can see that the spending varied widely, from almost $9 per residential customer in the Boston area to below $1 in most of the areas where we can find data. The chart also compares the share of households living in multifamily buildings, that's the dark blue line, to the share of residential program dollars going to multifamily programs, and that's the light green line. So this shows that with a few exceptions where the lines intersect in Boston, Indianapolis, and Riverside, California, the share of program dollars that are going to multifamily buildings is not keeping pace with its share of the housing market. Next slide. So overall, the good news is that there are a variety of utility customer-funded programs that are targeting the multifamily sector, and these range from no-cost direct install programs to those that offer comprehensive retrofit services. However, we found that there's a lot of room to improve, both to create new programs in areas where multifamily buildings are not being targeted, as well as scaling up those existing programs to achieve greater savings. And Todd and Ann will discuss the strategies recommended in their reports for how to take advantage of this opportunity. Now I'm going to turn it over to Todd Nedwick from the National Housing Trust.
Great. Thanks, Kate, and thanks to everyone who's joined the webinar. My name is Todd Nedwick. I'm with the National Housing Trust. We are a national nonprofit dedicated to preserving and improving existing multifamily affordable housing, which we do through public policy advocacy and engagement, real estate development, and lending. So we come at this issue from the perspective of ensuring that affordable housing is sustainable, truly affordable, and healthy for low-income families. And reducing energy use is obviously a critical strategy for accomplishing that. And so to that end, the Trust has been engaging with utility and other energy efficiency stakeholders, as well as the affordable housing community in select states to advance multifamily programs. And today I'm going to highlight just a little bit of what we've learned from that work, and in particular what we've learned about opportunities for energy efficiency and housing stakeholders to work together to achieve their respective goals. Next slide. So why is it important to focus on the multifamily market, and in particular the low-income multifamily housing market when it comes to energy efficiency? First, the multifamily housing stock has not been adequately served by energy efficiency programs. In fact, a recent research report completed by the University of Arizona and highlighted by Fannie Mae looked at data from the Energy Consumption Survey and found that multifamily rentals were significantly less energy efficient than other types of housing, both nationwide and in every region. And that was because this study found that multifamily rentals averaged 34% fewer energy efficiency features than other types of housing. And in particular, with respect to the low-income multifamily housing stock, the renters who live in low-income multifamily housing live in less energy-efficient housing than higher-income renters, and the gap between the lower-income and the higher-income renters with respect to energy efficiency has been increasing since 2005. So that obviously is not a good trend. Second, the lack of energy efficiency measures in multifamily rental housing has real consequences for the families that rely on affordable housing. Utility costs are the largest operating expense in subsidized multifamily rental buildings, and the second largest expense in individually metered subsidized multifamily buildings. And reducing operating expenses in low-income buildings frees up capital that can be used to address maintenance, repair needs, and other necessary improvements. And third, as Kate already mentioned, multifamily housing, it being an underserved building sector, presents opportunities to really help utilities achieve their energy savings goals. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, the Trust has been working with several national and local partners to engage energy efficiency and housing stakeholders in select states to advance multifamily programs. Our partners on this effort include the ACEEE, National Consumer Law Center, DNR International, as well as other state and local partners such as CNT Energy. And so as part of this work, we've been doing a few things. We've been convening stakeholders and exploring barriers to cost-effective energy efficiency improvements in multifamily housing. We've also been demonstrating to utilities and other program administrators the energy savings potential represented by the multifamily housing stock. We've been identifying tools and approaches to finance energy efficiency improvements and help utilities achieve their goals through this housing sector. And also, well, I'll talk a little bit more about, we've been also trying to demonstrate the value of new partnerships between utilities and housing stakeholders. And we've recently released an action guide summarizing some of the lessons learned from this work. The guide is primarily geared towards multifamily housing stakeholders who are interested in developing partnerships with utilities and advocating for improved programs and policies to address the energy efficiency needs of multifamily housing. Next slide, please. So what are some of the barriers to creating effective multifamily energy efficiency programs that we've encountered? And I'm sure these are familiar to many of you on the call. The first sort of category is programmatic and policy barriers. A common programmatic barrier to improving energy efficiency in multifamily housing is simply the fact that utility programs have not been creating, some utilities have not been creating tailored multifamily programs. Utilities may provide commercial or residential programs for which multifamily housing may be eligible, but the nature of the multifamily housing stock requires programs really designed for multifamily buildings to ensure that buildings receive comprehensive measures. Residential utility programs, for example, don't address common area efficiency needs like upgrading a central heating system, whereas commercial programs don't address necessarily the energy efficiency in residential tenant living spaces. So programs tailored for multifamily housing really overcome this obstacle by providing owners access to a full range of incentives to address the needs of the entire building. A common policy barrier that we've seen in a lot of states is that utilities will develop programs specifically targeted to the low-income population. However, master metered low-income multifamily buildings do not seem to be eligible for that program. And that's because the low-income program is designated for residential tenants, and in master metered multifamily buildings, it's considered a commercial utility account. A second category of barriers relates to the economic circumstances of multifamily housing, and in particular low-income multifamily housing. There's the split incentive market barrier, the fact that the landlord who owns the property and is responsible for capital investments and upkeep may not necessarily be the same party responsible for paying all the building's energy costs, which obviously creates a disincentive for the owner to invest in energy efficiency. Another economic barrier for low-income multifamily buildings is the fact that they may be operating with limited cash flow, which makes it difficult for them to raise the capital for upfront costs for energy efficiency improvements. And then the third category of barriers that we've seen really relates to capacity challenges, and that's both on the part of the energy efficiency program administrator as well as the multifamily owner and manager. Property owners may have limited resources, especially low-income property owners may have limited resources to pursue energy efficiency improvements, and may not have all of the information they need readily available for how they go about pursuing energy efficiency improvements. And we've seen that program administrators have struggled with kind of figuring out how best to access the multifamily market. So soon we'll hear from Anne about some specific recommendations for overcoming these obstacles. But before I turn it over to her, I just wanted to briefly highlight some examples of states where we see some of these challenges being addressed, and in part because the energy efficiency community and the housing community are collaborating together. Next slide. So the trust was, and our partners were engaged in Pennsylvania with utilities and housing stakeholders to address the fact that there were no dedicated multifamily energy efficiency programs available. In the spring of 2012, the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission began to develop rules that would govern the new phase of the utilities energy efficiency program portfolios. And leading up to the PUC's consideration of that guidance, the trust partnered with the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project and the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency to convene utility staff and multifamily housing practitioners to identify barriers to improving energy efficiency in multifamily housing. One of the key challenges identified was the fact that the utilities needed insurance that they would receive benefits of the energy consumption if they create multifamily programs. Utilities needed to feel confident that such programs would help them satisfy their energy savings obligations. And we saw an opportunity to help there with there's a statutory requirement in Pennsylvania that 10% of the energy consumption has to come from government, education, and the nonprofit sector. And what we did is we urged the Commission to allow the utilities to count energy savings achieved through low-income multifamily buildings as part of that carve-out. And the Commission agreed and determined that any savings achieved from multifamily housing that was financed under federal or state housing programs would count under this carve-out. This is a multifamily affordable housing that has rent restrictions that keeps rents affordable for low-income families. And then in response to the guidance provided by the PUC, there were several multifamily programs created, including PICO created a smart multifamily solutions program that is a single program that addresses improvements in both master metered common areas and individually master metered units. So by creating a single program, PICO has really streamlined the process owners must go through to access energy efficiency incentives for the multifamily building. Next slide. So in Maryland, the Department of Housing and Community Development has collaborated with the Maryland Energy Administration, as well as the state's utilities to develop the Multifamily Energy Efficiency and Housing Affordability Program, or MIHA. The collaboration is a good example of how housing and energy stakeholders can work together to overcome some of the capacity barriers that they may be experiencing in terms of developing effective multifamily programs. The partnership of DHCD and MEA really brings together the respective strengths of the two agencies. DHCD, which administers a number of housing finance programs, brings to the partnership their experience with multifamily housing finance, as well as a potential pipeline of customers that have received assistance through their programs. MEA provides critical technical expertise in energy improvement practices, audit review, those skills that the DHCD was not originally familiar with. So from the standpoint of the customer, the program really addresses some of the capacity barriers that get in the way of pursuing energy efficiency improvements. Owners of multifamily housing can apply for energy efficiency financing at the same time and through the same application process for rental housing financing. So DHCD is already a known partner to affordable multifamily housing providers, which makes it much easier for the utilities to target multifamily customers. Next slide. The final case study I just wanted to quickly present is, I think, a good example of how a utility and a housing agency has worked together to overcome some of the economic barriers that prevent multifamily housing from becoming energy inefficient. New Jersey's largest utility, PSE&G, and the New Jersey Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency have collaborated to develop a multifamily housing energy retrofit program that really overcomes some of those economic barriers. PSE&G's program provides upfront interest-free financing and grant incentives to cover the cost of eligible energy efficiency improvements. And PSE&G worked closely with the New Jersey Housing and Mortgage Finance Authority to really develop this strategy and to better understand some of the unique financial needs of affordable multifamily housing. The program includes grant incentives that significantly reduce the overall cost of the energy efficiency measures. And then the remaining costs are the customer's responsibility, but PSE&G provides 0% interest financing to cover those costs, which can be paid back by the owner through the owner's utility bill. And also, the program, because of New Jersey Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency's involvement, the program also includes guidance to multifamily owners to help them procure the energy efficiency services and solicit contractor bids. That's a role that the housing agency plays in the program. And also, another benefit of working with the housing agency, PSE&G really relied on the Housing Finance Agency to reach multifamily owners. Next slide. So I think I'm running out of time, and I just wanted to briefly conclude by, again, highlighting some of the potential opportunities and the benefits of reducing energy use in multifamily housing. First, there is a significant energy savings potential. So this bar chart here represents an analysis that the Trust did using regional data from the Energy Information Administration on the average annual electricity consumed by multifamily housing. And assuming a 15% reduction in electricity use, we estimated the potential gigawatt hours of electricity that can be saved annually. And nationwide, it's 21,000 gigawatt hours. And as you can see, it obviously varies among the states. But there are some states, obviously, with a lot of savings potential in the multifamily housing stock. And the second benefit is the potential for significant cost savings that help to preserve affordable housing and provide much-needed relief to low-income families, which is what we obviously think this issue is all about. So with that, I will conclude here, and I'll pass it on to Ann from CNT Energy to talk about some of the specific recommendations for developing effective multifamily programs.
Great. Thank you, Todd. I appreciate it. So I'm Ann McKibbin. I'm with CNT Energy. And just a little bit about us. We are an energy efficiency implementation organization. We help households, buildings, and communities sort of understand and manage their energy use through both energy efficiency and some dynamic electric pricing programs as well. But just so you know where we're coming from, our biggest program right now is a multifamily retrofit program here in northern Illinois, where we've helped building owners upgrade over 11,000 units. I'm going to discuss today a paper that we've written in partnership with ACEEE and with NHT's input as well. It's available on our websites, but it contains, despite the fact that our personal experience is in northern Illinois, the paper contains examples from around the country and tries to make, well, it lays out a framework of questions, really, that utilities should ask as they design a multifamily efficiency program, and it makes recommendations for designing programs that multifamily building owners are going to find attractive, that we think those recommendations will apply nationwide. So Todd did a great job of describing the barriers that multifamily building owners face when they're deciding whether to make efficiency investments, so I'm not going to rehash that. I did want to point out, highlight one of those barriers, though, from the discussion of capacity, really. From the building owner's perspective, especially from the perspective of a building owner who hasn't made efficiency investments before, payoff from these investments can be unpredictable from their perspective. So utility programs really play a great role here in helping building owners understand the payoffs from these investments, which of course include direct savings and lower maintenance costs. But building owners also experience some benefits from efficiency upgrades that they don't usually expect, and which are significant. And I think one great example of that is lower tenant turnover costs. Recruiting new tenants and preparing apartments for new tenants, it's one of the biggest ongoing costs for building owners in rental housing. In more affordable neighborhoods that don't support high rents and where buildings' profit margins are fairly slim, that cost can really make the difference between a building being profitable or not. And tenants tend to stay in buildings that are comfortable and where their bills and rents are affordable and stable. But this is not something that landlords are usually thinking about when they're looking at their HVAC system. So utilities can play a great role there in broadening the perspective of building owners regarding the benefits of energy efficiency. Now our paper sets out a series of questions for utilities to consider as they design programs. And those questions generally fall within three categories. First is the architectural and equipment characteristics of the local multifamily housing stock. Of course, these are going to vary dramatically across the various regions of the U.S., but our point here is just that utilities really need to get a good handle on what their buildings in their territory look like as they're designing their multifamily program. Questions like how old are the buildings typically? Are there large groups of buildings that are of a particular age? And how old are their HVAC and lighting questions will be extremely, and lighting systems will be extremely helpful during program design. The second sort of bucket of questions for research by utilities is utilities need to, of course, get a good handle on the extent of the split incentive problem. Split incentives are not universal in multifamily buildings. They depend on a number of factors, including, of course, are units owned or rented? Are you talking about condominiums or rental housing? Who pays for heat, water, domestic hot water, and common area utilities? And whether residential units are master metered, individually metered, or both. A good example in here in Chicago, we have a lot of master meter gas boiler systems for steam and hot water or hydronic heat systems where the landlord pays the heat. So for those buildings, we have both this big system where there is no split incentive problem. The landlord pays for the heat and they install the equipment. But then we also have a smaller split incentive problem around cooking gas where the landlord installs the kitchen equipment, but the tenant often pays for cooking gas, and around electricity. So that split incentive problem is not always, it varies from place to place and from building type to building type. The third sort of bucket of questions that utilities need to ask themselves as they're designing a multifamily program is about multifamily building finance. And it's really helpful to find out who in the area is financing multifamily properties and whether they offer any loans related to for energy-related upgrades. As I'll talk about a little later, those finance organizations can really be key partners in a program. So we make 9 recommendations for developing multifamily efficiency programs that are really going to attract building owners. And the first recommendation is to segment the multifamily market. And that just means grouping your buildings by common characteristics that affect program design, such as building type, building age, and split incentive and structures within the buildings. And that segmentation, of course, can be used to develop strategies for retrofitting the most promising, for identifying the most promising set of buildings, and then developing strategies for their retrofit. The segmentation can also be used to develop a standard measure set, if that's felt to be appropriate, that can reduce the scale of the assessment needed for a particular type of building. If, say, you have a large cohort of buildings that are same architectural type, similar systems, about the same age, it can be a standard measure set can kind of make that determination for any particular building a lot faster. Our second recommendation is to design programs specifically to overcome the split incentive barriers that exist in your local area. But to do that, of course, utilities have to set incentive levels to make efficient equipment a better deal for the building owner than standard equipment. And that has to be done both for planned upgrades and for replacement at failure situations. Because, of course, the building owner's decision-making process is different for each of those, so the utility has to plan different program processes. The utilities can also stress the reduced common area costs and improved tenant turnover and the accompanying reduced costs from that, from efficiency upgrades, to help owners overcome some of those cost concerns, so that when you're looking at installing equipment, cost is, there's a little more nuance around what the actual cost is. You're not just comparing HVAC system Y versus HVAC system X on cost alone. Utilities also have a role in encouraging the use of green lease terms. And there are some references in the paper that give more detail on this, but generally they're lease terms that align building owner and tenant incentives to help reduce split incentive barriers. And as those begin to be taken up by the industry, they might help with that split incentive problem over the long term. Our third recommendation is to coordinate gas and electric efficiency programs wherever possible. Single utility programs are really daunting for building owners, particularly owners of smaller portfolios. You know, a lot of apartment buildings are owned by small businesses that may have 10 or 20 buildings. And those owners particularly, especially if they want to do a comprehensive efficiency upgrade, they don't have a lot of extra manpower. And so anything that can be done to coordinate gas and electric program, reduce paperwork, coordinate timelines and eligibility requirements, and to give those building owners a single point of contact. All of that is going to speed the process considerably for the building owner, make it a lot easier for them to say yes to a retrofit, and make the program much more attractive. Next, utilities should, of course, give a lot of thought to choosing the most appropriate delivery mechanism for the program and emphasizing convenience to the building owner and the use of trusted partners. So, for example, a broad trade ally network, especially one with a lot of contractors in the pool who specialize in working in apartment buildings, that's an excellent way to ensure that efficient equipment is installed in those emergency replace it failure situations. Most building owners have their contractors on speed dial, and so you want to make sure that when something breaks and the contractor shows up at the building, that they've got the most efficient equipment possible on their truck right then and there. On the other hand, a program could use a one-stop shop or a hybrid model when it's proactively approaching building owners to sell more comprehensive whole building efficiency upgrades. So a one-stop shop model provides a single point of contact for the building owner throughout the upgrade process, from initial intake all the way to post-retrofit quality assurance. And a hybrid model, and the example we give in the paper of a good hybrid model is actually NYSERDA's Multifamily Performance Program. It may have, for example, a central intake system that determines the owner's basic needs, and then it may refer the owner to a network of program providers who then serve as a single point of contact from that point onwards through the retrofit process. The paper also contains a case study of the Energy Savers Program, which is the program that CNT Energy runs in the Chicago and Northern Illinois area in conjunction with a CDFI here, a financing institution, Community Investment Corporation. And that program follows the one-stop shop model, so there's a good example there. Our next recommendation is to integrate comprehensive and direct install programs. Integrating these programs makes them simpler for the building owner and less disruptive for tenants, and creates economies of scale with contractors who would do both kinds of work. It also allows the usage reductions from the direct install program to be taken into account later because you've got a really great direct install program, you're building relationship with the building owner, and you're doing a lot of follow-up, and as you're doing follow-up, you've convinced the building owner they want to come back for a comprehensive upgrade. So combining those two programs can be really useful, not only from an economies of scale perspective, but from a marketing perspective as well. And then rebates need to be made as accessible and easy as possible. And again, this goes back to coordinating programs across utilities and integrating all your multifamily programs in a way that really prevents owners from being shuttled sort of back and forth from program to program. Contractors who work with multifamily buildings are a central partner to encourage owners to claim rebates when they're replacing equipment at failure as well. Okay, our seventh recommendation is to partner with sources of attractive multifamily financing. Finance partners, they have an interest in energy efficiency too, especially for multifamily buildings, because energy efficiency stabilizes the finances of the multifamily building and makes the loan less risky for the finance department, for the financer. So finance partners can educate multifamily clients about efficiency upgrades when they seek financing, and they can create really great program referrals. A lot of times when a building owner is refinancing their building, they're often planning changes to the building at the same time. And so those changes can be expanded to include energy efficiency improvements if that is sort of rolled into the whole package of the project that they're planning to do at that time that they're looking for financing. So for owners who are contemplating a gut rehab, for example, there's no better time to decide to insulate and air seal your building. And it can be with a close partnership with a finance institution. It can be the finance institution that actually puts that idea into the head of the building owner. Our eighth recommendation is to provide rigorous follow-up and to provide building energy use data as well. And this ensures that savings persist. There's of course, most all utility programs have a quality assurance, quality control element to it, and this can be rolled in with that. And so it ensures that savings persist, and it convinces the building owners that the work that they did to their building was worthwhile, and provides really an ongoing opportunity every so often to touch base back with the building owner and provide suggest further improvements, either on the building that they've already done some work on or on the rest of their building portfolio. And our last recommendation is to really engage with the multifamily and industry players early and often. There's a number of different roles and different organizations in any area that are working in the multifamily industry. These folks have a wealth of information and a wealth of contacts that can help utility programs succeed. I've seen some of these organizations really just turn into, wonderful marketing avenues for a utility program because they recognize that this is going to help their industry. And so they want to ensure that building owners who can participate do. And really, energy efficiency is to everyone's benefit in this industry, so it's really useful to have those conversations right up front. So that's it for our formal presentations. We're happy to take your questions, again, using the question box. Please type them in that section on the lower right-hand side of your screen. And we've had a number of questions come in already, so I'm going to work with my colleagues here to read some questions, and then we'll get some answers for folks. Okay, a question for Todd. We've had a few requests for links to papers you cited. Can you provide a web address to the Arizona report and your action guide?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, Anne, if it makes sense to include that on CNT's website, along with the posting of the webinar.
Yeah, I think it absolutely would. If you send us that information, we'll make sure it goes up at the same time in the same place.
Great.
Okay, I've got a question for me. Has anyone been able to quantify the lower tenant turnover outcome? And is there any documentation regarding lower renter unit turnover with efficiency and comfort levels? That's an excellent question. To my knowledge, there has not been any quantification of it. In our program, we've gotten anecdotal evidence from building owners just telling us that that was something that happened after they did their retrofit. And we've heard that from other program providers in other places around the country as well, but I do not know of a study. So if you're running multifamily programs out there and you're doing data collection, I would love to talk about getting together with folks to try to quantify that. I think it's potentially would be really helpful not only to help market these programs to building owners, but also anywhere where non-energy benefits discussions are coming up in state regulatory proceedings. So my answer, unfortunately, is no, but if you are at all interested in working on something like that, please contact me and we'll talk further. So the next question's for Todd. What was the greatest obstacle in developing and implementing programs in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland?
That's a really good question. I think what we realized early on was that there needed to be really needed to spend a lot of time helping folks understand, what it is that they do, what their goals are, helping utilities to understand the goals of the affordable housing community, as well as helping the affordable housing community to understand the role of the utilities. So it was sort of, an ongoing dialogue that we needed to facilitate. We would, in most of the states we worked in, we would have multiple convenings to work through some of that, lack of information, I guess. So I think that was just sort of, but there were very positive results from just going through that process, convening people. It was a really important step, and it accomplished quite a bit.
Right. Okay, we have a question. What role do we see for benchmarking in utility multifamily energy programs? Kate, would you like to respond to that?
Sure, I can start, and then I don't know, Ann, you can maybe share some of your experience from Energy Savers. But one element of our report that I didn't have a chance to talk about was we looked at sort of the local policy context in each of the metropolitan areas that we analyzed. And benchmarking can play a key role, obviously, in helping to overcome some of the barriers that that we were talking about, and giving building owners a complete picture of energy use in their buildings, not just the meters that they pay. So that was one of several policies that we looked at, you know, in addition to things like energy efficiency resource standards, which are driving, you know, higher energy efficiency targets for many utilities, and the multifamily sector can be a new opportunity in some of those areas. So yeah, it's one thing that we included in our report and can definitely help, you know, whether it's a policy that requires benchmarking or even just a utility that makes it easier for building owners to use automated benchmarking to get a sense of energy use in their building. I think all of those things are helpful.
Yeah, I would agree. In Chicago, we don't yet have a multifamily benchmarking ordinance, so it's not widely done here, but we do it on all the buildings we work on, and we found that our building owners really like it. They feel it's a real value add to the service. Okay, let's see. Can you give some specific examples of how financing for multifamily programs has been provided? I can give a quick example for how it works with the Energy Savers programs, and I'd welcome examples from my colleagues. With the Energy Savers program, we work with a community development finance institution called the Community Investment Corporation, and that's CIC, they're called, is the largest multifamily lender in Illinois. They handle mortgages on that kind of property, and they have a fund, a revolving loan fund, from which those building owners who want to do this kind of work can get financing from that revolving loan fund. That said, only about a third of the building owners who go through the Energy Savers programs actually take advantage of that revolving loan fund, even though it's got a really preferential interest rate. The other two-thirds finance the retrofits out of their cash flow. Todd and Kate, have you seen any other sort of examples of multifamily finance that are worth pointing out?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just refer folks back to that New Jersey example where PSE&G has created an on-bill approach, which is really advantageous from a low-income multifamily housing perspective. Often, low-income multifamily buildings, the owners are just not able to take on any additional asset-backed debt, and so to the extent that the financing can be provided so that it can be repaid through the utility bill as like a surcharge on the utility bill, you know, where there's no upfront cost required on the part of the owner. That's a really, I think, a really promising model that we're seeing begin to be implemented in more and more places.
Yeah, and this is Kate. I would refer folks to the appendix of our report actually has a table that describes each of the 50 programs that we identified in more detail. It indicates which are using some sort of financing mechanism. And the one other example I would offer is the pilot program, which is underway in Portland, Oregon, called Empower. You know, there's a number of community groups as well as the Energy Trust of Oregon that are involved in that pilot, and that's an on-bill repayment program, but the financing is provided through a community finance institution. So that's one other example I'd point folks to. It's a pilot program at this point, so it wasn't captured as much in our report, which looked at spending in 2011.
Okay. Let's see. We've got a number of questions here. So, okay, so this one. There's a question of whether CNT has been involved in multifamily retrofits for closed-loop geothermal heat pumps. And I have to admit, I don't know that we have, just because most of the buildings we work on are urban. I know there are such systems in Illinois, but to my knowledge, we haven't worked on them. But a similar question says, what types of efficiency projects have most been needed in multifamily? And I think that really depends on your region and the particular type of housing that you have in your region. So for us in Chicago, we've got a lot of masonry walk-ups built between 1880 and 1940. And for them, they need steam heat pipe insulation because they're virtually uninsulated, and boilers. But that's going to be very different than the typical needs of a multifamily community in Florida or even out in DC or elsewhere. So it really depends on what your multifamily housing stock looks like in that particular area, I think. Okay, we have a few questions about Todd's New Jersey case study. Are the loans for the New Jersey program transferable? And does PSENG's on-bill repayment require underlying lender consent? Todd, can you address those?
I'm not sure what is meant by transferable, to be honest with you. Those questions I probably can't address adequately. I'm just not as familiar with the specific financing arrangements. But there's a paper that PSENG published that goes into detail about the program, and it might make sense for us to add that paper to the CNT website as well.
Oh, great. Yeah, send us the link and we'll make sure it goes up there.
Okay.
So the next question, given the complexities of regulations and revenue models around low-income multifamily housing, do energy efficiency savings really get passed on to families? Okay, I'll take a crack at it, but I would love my colleagues' input as well. You know, here in Illinois, a lot of the affordable housing that's where the rent is such that it is affordable to a moderate income or low income family. Most of that is market rate housing. And so the rent in those buildings is going to be set at, you know, what the neighborhood typical rent is. And so it can't go up, I guess. So it can't really go up because the market just won't bear it. However, it can go down if it's looking a little high for the neighborhood. And any improvement in the bottom line for the building owner themselves does free up additional money for things like maintenance and other, you know, keeping that building stable and keeping the rent where it is. But I'd love to know my colleagues' thoughts on that.
No, I think that's a really good point. I think that there's a benefit to the tenant in terms of stabilizing the affordable housing. So even if it's, you know, it's a master metered building, you know, that's operating low cash flow and has rising utility expenses, and that really threatens the continued affordability, the continued viability of the building. So you know, there is a benefit to the tenant in that sense. And we're also, you know, seeing, you know, in some cases, reinvestment of the savings from the energy efficiency improvements into other services, maintenance of the building to improve it for the tenants. So there's multiple ways that the tenants can benefit from the improvements.
This is Kay. I think I just want to underscore the point that Ann made that there's a lot of the affordable housing stock, particularly multifamily affordable housing stock, is not necessarily federally assisted. Not receiving some assistance through federal programs. In our report, we provide the number of assisted units in each of the metro areas, so you can get a sense of, what extent of the market in each of those areas is made up of federally assisted units. But again, as Adam was saying, there are millions of units which are affordable, but not necessarily receiving assistance, and those tenants wouldn't necessarily be eligible for low-income programs such as the Weatherization Assistance Program.
Okay, there's a question about my presentation for the segmentation recommendation. What exactly are the most promising buildings and what factors contribute to this assessment? Well, I think the most promising buildings are going to depend on your local housing stock. Once you've got a really good feel for the various types and ages of buildings in your local housing stock, you'll be able to determine, and the split incentive, how the split incentives play out in various types of buildings. Then from that, I think you'll be able to determine what your local most promising buildings are. So I think the things that go into that assessment are the extent of the split incentive problem, the age and just architectural characteristics of a building that would have to do with energy efficiency. So for us, for example, these masonry buildings are largely uninsulated. So anything you can do regarding insulation is going to be really helpful for them, and that's a pretty cheap thing to do. And then the age and type of system that the buildings have. I mean, between those things, I think that gets at most of it, what you would need to characterize a group of buildings as being pretty promising. Okay, I have a question for Todd. Todd, could you talk a little bit more about why the 4 states, I think it was your last slide, showed 4 states that offer a greater potential for savings for multifamily. Could you talk a little bit more about why you think that those 4 states have such great potential?
Yeah, so in doing this analysis, we looked at the number of multifamily units in the state, as well as we looked at a regional level, what is the average consumption in terms of energy for a multifamily building. So, where you see kind of the high potential states, I think it's a combination of, the fact, in Florida there's probably is a climate where there's a lot of potential for energy savings, and there's also a lot of multifamily housing units in Florida, and so I think that sort of explains why some of those are higher than others. Those are sort of some of the variables that we looked at.
Great. Okay, and this is the last question. There was a question about asking about what the Green Button Initiative is. I think, let's see, I can give a crack at it, but the Green Button Initiative, it's an initiative of the U.S. Department of Energy it's an effort to make it easier for building owners to access their own usage data. So with the Green Button, utilities are providing energy usage data to building owners in an easily accessible, downloadable format that they can then put into things like Portfolio Manager or other analysis tools. I think there's a lot more information about that. If you Google Green Button, U.S. Department of Energy, you'll get the whole kit and caboodle on that. So I think we're at 11 o'clock now. So this is the end of our time, so end of our webinar. The slides and an audio recording of the webinar and the Q&A session will be available on CNT Energy's website. It's cntenergy.org, probably this afternoon. We'll also put up links to some of the items from Todd's report. And I know PSE&G was on the call as well. Unfortunately, we couldn't get them unmuted in a way that didn't cause crazy feedback. So PSE&G, if you have an answer to the questions that referred to you, please send us a little note. We'll make sure it goes up there as well. So thank you all so much for attending. Oh, we'll also put the slides up on our Facebook page. And so thank you all so much for attending. We're really glad you could make it and hope that this was helpful. Great. Goodbye, everybody.